recording next week.
There you go, David.
Right, great. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. As I mentioned to a few of you before we got started, we are recording this webinar, and I will be sending you a link to the recording early next week. Monday's the holiday, so my goal is to get it to you Tuesday morning. And this will be hopefully something that you can share with others in your organization. You're welcome to share any of the material. I'm also hopeful that everyone got the email that I sent out yesterday with the meeting planner and then the meeting inventory as well. But we'll embed those in the chat box. Lisa will do that for us. So if you didn't happen to see that, no worries. We've got them for you right here today. But I think it would be helpful to start off our time together and just kind of create a context before we get into the program. And I'm sure many of you have seen these numbers, these statistics, but there's been a lot of buzz about them over the last several months in particular, about the amount of time that the average leader spends in meetings every day. And also the amount of time that the average executive leader spends in meetings every day. And what I find to be somewhat startling is that the estimate, and there's a lot of different numbers out there, but on average, what the data tells us is that senior executives are typically spending upwards of 75% of their day in meetings. That's about 2/3 of their meetings, maybe a little bit over 2/3 of their day in meetings, while other leaders at other levels in the organization, on average, are spending about 1/3 of their day in meetings, 35%. Nobody on this webinar is working a 7.5 or 8 hour day. All of us are working a lot more than that. And so when you do the math on that and you begin to realize we're spending a big chunk of our time in meetings every day, regardless of our level, I think it makes the case for why this is such an important topic. And it's my hope that through our time together this morning, that you'll have an expanded context. I'm sure each of you are doing many good things to make sure that your meetings are effective. But I'm hoping that you can come away from our time together this morning with a few new nuggets of things that you can use in your role as a leader and influencer that hopefully helps to create more impact for your meetings. So let's begin. And I want you to feel free to stop me at any point in time. This is your time. For those of you that know me and have been on my webinars or my training, you know that this is so much about a conversation. I'm not going to do a lot of slide reading. I'm going to highlight some of the slides. I've got many points in this program where I'm going to encourage your input, because I think a big part of my job here is tapping into your wisdom. While we have a collective group of about 15 or so people on the webinar, I'm convinced that there's a lot of wisdom on this webinar. And one of my roles, I think, as I said, is to try to access that, to tap into that. And that's what that think, share, and learn is all about. I also want to create another context and ask you to think about this overriding theme here that I like to think of as conversation starters. And I know some of you are familiar with that because I use it in all of my programs. The idea behind conversation starters is really tied to what you do with this material, what you do with this webinar a week or 2 weeks or a month from now. And the hope is that through our time together, you will find little nuggets in the program that you can use to start a conversation with someone back in your workspace. Because I think in many ways, the real value of this is, what do you do with it a week, a month or so from now? And I think one of the ways that you can do that, that's very low maintenance, certainly low cost or no cost, and pretty easy to get done, is to start a conversation with someone back in your work area about this program. Share with them the recording when you get it next week. That's fine. But these are all little things that you can do to start a conversation. So let's start off. And I put laugh in there because I had this Dilbert cartoon. ASOC is the person on the left. Wally is the person on the right. If you don't read Dilbert, I encourage you to do it. Someone once said that if you read Dilbert for a whole year, it's the equivalent of 1 credit towards an MBA in leadership. Now, I don't know that for sure. I haven't been able to validate that, but there is a lot of wisdom in this. So Wally says to ASOC, are you leveraging our resources to optimize the client value stream? And poor Isaac is like, what? I'm just messing with you. Nothing I say in meetings actually means anything. To which he says, then why do you talk? I tried listening once. It was awful. So let's just tap into your perspective on this. What's the message in this? You know, I said a moment ago, there's going to be a lot of places in our time together this morning where I'm going to encourage your input. And we'll start right here. Can anybody give me any reaction to what do you think this cartoon is saying, or how might it apply to meetings that any one of us attend? And I want you'll see a prompt a little bit in a couple of slides that says, please feel free to use chat or unmute. This is a nice sized group, so I'm really fine with having you unmute and just share your perspective. But if chat's easier for you, I'm okay with that too. I want this to be a good use of your time, and I want it to be a good experience for you. So can anybody share, and Lisa, I'll ask you to track chat for me. Can anybody share their thoughts on what's the story behind this cartoon? Anybody? What's it telling you?
Some meetings are boring.
Yeah, meetings could be boring, right? Anybody else? Thank you.
Yeah, what people are saying is just like, it's like on repeat when you go to these meetings. That's why at the end, we said, I tried listening once and it was awful, right? So if you're always hearing the same thing over and over again, people will just talk to not have to hear it.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sending you a big high five through my camera here. How true is that, right? And it's one that I think we can all relate to. This could be another good conversation starter, by the way. So please feel free to use that. But let's create more of a context and tap into your wisdom. And I'd like to have people just give me their thoughts on what characteristics come to mind or have encompassed the worst meeting you ever attended. Let's just take a minute and talk about that. What are some characteristics or dynamics of the worst meeting you ever attended? Anybody? And I think we just heard a couple good examples that might fit into that category. But anybody else? What are some examples or characteristics of really bad meetings? Anybody?
Monotone.
Monotone.
Yeah. They don't have any energy and they're just reading off a PowerPoint.
Yeah. Good one. Yeah. What
Not
else?
too engaging.
Not too engaging. Yeah, good one. Yeah. Anything else? How about the same agenda? How about the same agenda over and over again? In one of my corporate jobs, we had a Monday morning meeting routine where the agenda was exactly the same. And it was issues that were being covered again and again and again that realistically in an effective meeting would have been covered once a month. But instead, every Monday they were covered, and it was kind of so redundant, so repetitive. How about the characteristics that encompass really good ones that you've attended?
Engaging,
yeah.
Yeah, the person that was conducting the meeting was very engaging.
Yeah, they're engaging, right? Yeah. And people are showing up. Anything else that really sets a good one apart?
Whether or not you learn anything when you walk away from it.
Oh yeah, that you learn something. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, good. Anybody else? Did those good ones have an agenda?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time they do, right?
Yeah.
And that's a part. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. So that's all good insight. Thank you. Did I miss anything in the chat box, Lisa?
Nope, we're all just talking.
All right, good. I like it when we're just talking. This is a nice side group. So here I've got these 10 questions worth considering that I'm hoping spark some conversations with you and your teams back at your workspace. You could use all of them. You could use some of them. It's entirely up to you. But I have 10 here with the intent, with the goal or the hope that you'll find one or two that you think, okay, these really make sense to me. I'm going to share this one with my boss, or I'm going to share this one with my team, or however you want to do it. But let's start with the first one. And I'm going to read most of these. I won't read all of them. But on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being excellent and 1 being a complete waste of time, how would participants rate the last meeting you had? Think about that. And that could be a question that you would actually pose to them. So in your role as a leader, you conduct a lot of meetings, right? And so you could actually share this with others. This is certainly something for those of you in HR particularly. I know I've got some of my HR colleagues here. That would be good to share with other managers, right? To get them thinking. And so much of that, and I want to underscore that for a second, so much of this content, these questions, where we are even right now, is really about giving us an opportunity to think more focused, to think more deliberate about this very important topic of meetings and effective meetings, right? So that's one, to think about that on a scale of 1 to 10. How do they impact the bottom line? That's a tough one to measure, but it's one to consider. What value do they bring to other departments? What's the cost of consensus? And that's something that I hear from a lot of leaders I work with, is a pretty tough one sometimes, because listen, there's all these different dynamics at play where we want to try to be inclusive. We want to try to have everybody have a voice. That's smart business. That's the right way to do it. But sometimes we have to make decisions. A lot of times we have to make decisions. And sometimes, particularly as leaders, we have to make some pretty hard decisions. And we don't have the luxury of getting everybody's input on it. But often what happens is we spend a lot of time trying to get consensus, and the outcomes get diluted. And so I think that that's a good conversation starter too. And then how do you measure the impact of your meetings, right? But then here's 5 more. Is the frequency really necessary? You know, I made reference to that Monday morning meeting that I had. I've had lots of meetings, of course, but that one was one that always stood out for me as being pretty much a waste of time, because like the first half hour of it was kind of just talking about how was your weekend, where did you go, what did you have for appetizers at Max's, whatever the case may be. And while that's nice, and I appreciate the community sense that comes out of that, we all have really, really busy jobs and a lot to do. And most times meetings result in us doing more work, right? Very few times do we leave a meeting where we don't have more on our plate, right? But anyway, the point of that being is that was a scheduled meeting for every single Monday morning at 8 o'clock. And I think realistically, it probably could have been done every other Monday. But that's something for you to consider. Is the length absolutely necessary? Are you inviting only the right people? I think that becomes, sometimes we'll see a scenario, I've seen this, where we're on a project team, let's say, and I'm sure this applies to some of you, we're on a project team where, we start off and we have 8 of us, 9 of us on the project team. But as we make our way through the project, other people are less involved and maybe even can step off. They're not involved at all. The 2 or 3 people that, I'm thinking of, they were really in the upfront stages of the project, and now their work is done. But yet they get invited to the meetings every week, and they show up. And sometimes they don't, but they get invited. And so we're having people in that meeting that really don't necessarily add any value or contribute anything. And then, of course, is everybody clear on your expectations? And I think, and we'll talk about this in a little bit later, particularly when we get to the planning section. I think it's really valuable to be able to consider what your expectations are. So much of the tone and the context that we're going to use for today is in the context of your meetings, okay? Now, this applies to everybody in your organization. That's why I said you're welcome to share this with them. But the idea is to be thinking about your meetings, and starting with that, I'll ask the question, how much time do you put into defining your expectations for the meeting? And there's a model that just popped into my head that I've actually used with some leaders that's tied to public speaking. And some of I do a lot of that, and I've taught classes on that, but I've attended a lot of classes too. And one class that I attended many years ago had this model, think, feel, and do. And that was really tied to your message, or the 3 parts of your speech or your presentation. But I've come to realize that applies to meetings, it applies to coaching conversations, it applies to a lot of interactions as leaders with our teams. And so in that context, in terms of expectations and planning your meeting, I would ask the question, so what do I want them to think? What do I want them to feel? And then what do I want them to do? So think, feel, do is that model. And I think it certainly applies here, because once you can answer those questions, you have a pretty good idea of what your plan is and what your expectations are, right? And I think they feed off of each other. And then that last one there, are people held accountable? Do they have a clear sense of what's expected of them? They leave that meeting knowing what their deliverables are to you as the manager or supervisor or leader, or director, whatever your role may be, and that they have a good plan for follow-up. So I encourage you to think about which of these would be. I'm going to go back to the last slide, the first 5. And again, you'll get all of this information Tuesday. But think about what of those 10, pick 1 or 2 that you think would be smart to be able to share and start a conversation with somebody in your organization. Because again, in that context of conversation starters, those would be some prime ones, I think, right? So let's look at some options. You know, there's a lot of different ways we can frame the meetings, and there's different types of meetings, and my thinking is there's probably more than 4, but the core model that I've used for a long time and that I've seen apply very well for a long time are these 4. And there's the daily check-in, the weekly tactical, the monthly strategic, and then the quarterly review. And they all have some similarities, but they also have some differences. And what we'll do now is we'll just look at some of what those are, and then we'll get into doing a little bit of an assessment here in terms of how you're doing with your meeting management. So I'm not gonna read all of these, but you know, that daily check-in, it's really short. It's a huddle. It's standing ideally. I think that's a good way of doing it, because what happens is once you sit down and people bring in their coffee and their bagel or whatever it is, it just sets a tone for slowing it down, and we're just hanging out. And that's not a bad thing. Believe me, I get it. You know, I said that a moment ago in that example of my Monday morning meetings in that last corporate job. I get the whole idea of community. That's important. But when we're doing a daily check-in, it's really about a laser focus. So it's standing, it's limited to 1 or 2 items, probably, certainly not more than that, maybe only 1. You know, stick with it, make it routine, don't exceed 5 minutes. That you can get a lot of things done, particularly if you're keeping that agenda to only 1 or 2 items. And not to get too far ahead of myself here, but while I'm on that topic, that becomes one of the barriers, often becomes one of the barriers to an effective meeting, and that is packing, what I call packing the agenda. And let me be the first one to tell you, I've done it many times, more times than I probably I could remember, or more times than I probably would want to remember, because I'm trying to get it done. I'm trying to pack as much in. We can get, I'm going to have Jason and Elizabeth in that meeting. I want to talk about this topic. You know, I'm going to have Sarah and Tuesday in this meeting. I want to talk about that topic. So now all of a sudden I've got a 6-item, 7-item agenda for an hour meeting, let's say. Now, the hour meeting speaks to the next one, the weekly tactical. That's probably not more than an hour. I wouldn't exceed more than an hour. It could be less, but if you limit it to 3 priorities and you have people give 2-minute updates, depending on the size of the group, that may vary a little bit. But again, a key part of that is a very well-defined agenda. And I know everyone here knows this, but I can't resist saying it. Listen, I know you know this. There's a strong correlation between what we put into it and what we get out of it. And I think many of you, if not all of you, I'm pretty sure all of you would be quick to agree that that also applies to us as leaders, just in the context of our leadership, right? What we put into it has a big impact on what we get out of it and how we impact our team, right? So that's a framework for the weekly tactical. And then parking lot items are really important. And that I often have said, the parking lot item can be your friend. It can be a positive in that once you establish the rules of the meeting, and that's something that's worth considering too, that you have, and hopefully from this program, you're going to come out of it with a lot more clarity around how would you structure rules for the meeting. Do you need to structure? Because not every team needs to have structured rules for the meeting. I personally think it's a good idea, but I don't think that some teams need it as much as others, and I leave it entirely up to you. I would not make a judgment call on that. But anyway, the idea would be to give people an opportunity to have parking lot issues, so that when somebody brings something up, I bring up something that wasn't on the agenda, and one of you who's leading the meeting can very quickly say, hey, hey, Dave, you know what? That's a parking lot issue because it's not on the agenda today. And nobody, and I don't feel bad now because I know that, okay, you heard me and you acknowledged that, okay, I have this item, but guess what? In respect to the whole team that's in this meeting, it's not on the agenda. It's got to be a parking lot issue or a parking lot item that we then circle back with after the meeting, we'll say, or the next meeting. And ultimately you as the leader would define that. So that's something to think about. I'm going to take a breath here. So then you get into the longer ones, the monthly strategic, and that it would follow that would be once a month. The quarterly would be quarterly. I think another thing that they have in common, and I said that, okay, when I was first introducing those 4 types of meetings, I said that there's a lot of commonality, but there's also differences. And chief among the commonality is that really well-defined agenda. And that ideally gets sent out. It gets sent out a couple of days in advance. I have several projects I'm working on now where I've got project teams that we do weekly or bi-weekly team meetings or Zoom meetings, and I'm leading them in a couple of the cases. And there's a lot of people that I know are all really, really busy. And so in an effort to make best use of our time, I send them a suggested agenda. We usually talk about what the agenda is for the next meeting in the last meeting, so we have an idea of what we're going to be doing in our next meeting. That helps. But then in a case like that, one of them in particular is Friday meetings. And so I try to send them an agenda, a suggested agenda on Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning. And what I do is I'll just simply say, looking forward to our time together on Friday at 10. Here's my suggested agenda for the meeting. Please let me know if you have additions to it or any questions by Wednesday afternoon. So I give them 48 hours to respond to it. I think that's reasonable. And oftentimes I get good input that's helpful. Sometimes I get nothing other than thanks, Dave, but that's okay too. That being said, we go into that meeting where everybody knows exactly what we're doing. And I think that goes a long way in helping us get things done, right? That now this monthly one, so those are typically 1 hour. The ones that I just referenced, the Friday one is a 1 hour, 10 to 11. The quarterly or the monthly would be maybe 3 hours. Just because it says not to exceed 3 hours doesn't mean it can't be 2 hours. So much of it is about trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish and what's reasonable to accomplish. And I don't mean to belabor the point about packing the agenda, but I have to just say it again. Be so mindful. If there's one nugget you get out of this from me today, I'd be okay if it was that. Hopefully there's going to be more because we're just starting and there's a lot more to cover. But that whole idea of packing the agenda is such an important thing. You know, it reminds me of a post I saw yesterday from Marshall Goldsmith. I know many of you know him as one of the great leadership thinkers of our time. And he had a post that said, so often we put time and energy into helping leaders to figure out what they have to start doing to be better leaders. But very few times do we spend time talking about what they have to stop doing. And I thought, wow, that's a great reminder for me. It's a great reminder for my work. It's a great reminder for all of us as leaders. What do we need to stop doing? And I know for me, there was a period of time where I because I'm very driven to get a lot done. That's how I thrive on that. I like to get a lot of things done. I move it forward. I'm a D in the disc. I'm very driven in that regard. I like to get things done. I would overpack that agenda. And then what would happen is we would get to the end of the meeting and 2 or 3 items didn't even get a minute of time. And if those people were part of whoever had that agenda item was probably feeling left out, to say nothing of feeling rushed because we couldn't get to it. And then finally, the quarterly review, those are more big strategic kind of issues that I think, would warrant sometimes a bigger group, by the way, maybe with subcommittees or task force. Don't exceed 6 hours. If you're doing a meeting of 4 hours or longer, you should feed them. That's not in there, but it's something to think about. And I think, the 2 or 3 hour meeting, if your budget allows, have coffee and something to snack on. I'm not saying you've got to do that, but I do think when you're doing a one of these quarterly reviews that's maybe 4 hours, a half a day or 6 hours, please make sure that there's food in it, because I think that just helps people to do a better job. So before I go on to this next slide, let me just stop for a second. Are there any questions from anyone about any one of these 4 meeting options? Anybody?
Nope.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. So let's take a time out and we're going to do that meeting effectiveness inventory. Now, I mentioned when we first started that I sent this out to you yesterday. It went out at 8 o'clock in the morning. I trust that all of you saw it. However, no worries. As I speak, Lisa Gallo is embedding it in the chat box. So if you don't have that handy, just click on the chat box, which is about the middle of your screen there on the bottom. And there it is, the meeting effectiveness inventory. It's a PDF. So all you would need to do is just click on that and you will access it. You will not get bumped off the webinar. So no worries there. It's just there for you. Okay, so I see that note from you. Okay, thank you, Tuesday. All right, good. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to get out of that chat for a second. Review each statement carefully, read over each statement carefully. Circle the number on the rating scale that best describes you. 5 is most like you. 1 is least like you. And then tally your score. And what I'd like you to do is select 1 as a potential development opportunity. And then ultimately be prepared to discuss your thinking on this or your insights on it. So I'm going to go ahead and set a timer on my phone here for 3 minutes. Please take 3 minutes to complete that. And then we'll talk about it. What were your Thank you. So let's just briefly talk about your impressions of the meeting effectiveness inventory. What were your impressions? What did you think? Anybody?
It made me laugh at myself because
made
I
you-
thought I was like a good number. And then when I really like looked at it, I realized that I'm not.
Okay.
So
Thank you, Tuesday. That's very good. That's being vulnerable, which is a strength of a leader, everybody. Just as a reminder, that is a strength. And so thank you. I commend you for that. Yep, that's good. Anybody else? How about Janine? What were your impressions?
Actually, I scored relatively well. I don't know if that's part of like the train brain and the organ, that I'm too organized sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think the one thing I don't do that I should do is send an agenda ahead of time. I don't always do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that how important that could be to send it. In my team, we actually have a working agenda.
Yeah.
So we post it right after our bi-weekly. So everyone can kind of jump in and out and put their topics, which I actually kind of like that because there's many of us and we have all different positions.
Yeah.
So that format works really well too.
I've seen it. Yeah, I've seen it. It can be, as long as it gets managed and people are all contributing, I think it'd be great. That's good insight, Janine. Hey, Jordan, how about you? What were your impressions? Okay, Jason? Impressions? I don't think
I got some stuff. I got some stuff I got to work on.
Oh, no, good. Thank you. There you go. That's being vulnerable and transparent. Good
Scored
call.
around a 47.
Oh, hey, not bad. Listen, here now. This is a perfect lead into what I'm about to say. So thank you for setting this up for me so perfectly. And that is this. And for those of you who've been through my training, you know exactly what I'm about to say. And that is this. I don't really care what your score is. Okay, that's not the point. The point is, this is really like an awareness inventory that gives you some insight and hopefully an expanded awareness of how you're doing with this, right? And secondly, it's really about, in my mind, it's about finding just one item on that inventory that maybe you haven't thought much about, that maybe isn't even on your radar, right? And so now you look at it and you say, well, okay, wow. I use some type of process to track and manage time. gee, I don't do that. Maybe I should start doing that. Maybe we should have a timekeeper, a volunteer timekeeper. If we're going to allow 2 minutes for each person to report out, we should be timing that. I mean, just to keep things on track. And so here's the whole point. It's really not about the score. I would never get a 75. I've been doing this for a long time. I have run, I think, pretty good meetings. I'm not going to ever get a 75, and I'm okay with that. But I know I can get better. And I think that that's such a good reminder for all of us. And I'd like everybody to just pause and think about that for a second. So this, you know that I'm deeply passionate, very passionate about trying to be a good leader. That's my life's work, trying to figure out how do we become good leaders, right? Because our teams deserve it, because we're capable of doing it, right? All of those things are true. But I think the message here really is about acknowledging that we can all get better. It's not about perfection, right? And I emphasize that so much in my work. It's about progress. So, I'll use you, Jason. You got a 47, great. So what would a 50 look like? What would it take to get a 50? And then, just to take a deeper dive on it, this is my analytical mind saying, okay, well, if I gave, if I had a 47 and I'm going to just randomly say, okay, ensure the meetings end on time. Oh, I never do that. So, okay, what's the impact of that? I'm just picking that randomly. I gave myself a 2 on that. What's the impact of that? Who does that impact, right? And I just think there's a lot of good insights that can be gained from taking that time to think. Remember, I said in the very beginning, this is an opportunity for us to take a time to think, share, and learn together. And this is no different, right? So I encourage you to just think about that. And you have it electronically. And if you want to share it with somebody in your work, I said before, and I'll say it again, probably a few more times, I'm perfectly fine with you sharing any of this material internally in your organization. So please feel free to do that. But again, just thinking about what it is that you can work on, and that's really the extent of it. So, all right. So what happened to okay, do I have to do this now? Wait a second. Oh, hold on. It's going too fast. Okay. Oh my God, I'm going too fast. All right. So there we go here. All of a sudden my clicker just stopped working, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. So please think about that. What's just one thing that you can work on and maybe boost your score 3 points, right? So let's look at the elements of a successful meeting. This is really what goes into it. Are there more things? I wouldn't be surprised if there are more things. I've had this philosophy for a long time that this content, most of which I've developed on my own over the years, through a lot of different sources, represents a really pretty good framework for this particular topic. But is it everything? No, I don't think it's everything. So there's probably more. That could be something you could consider as a conversation starter if you were sharing this slide with a group. And if we had time today, I would consider doing it, but we don't. I want to cover everything with you today as much as I can, in fairness to your time. But you could have a conversation with some back at work. Hey, what's missing here? Dave O'Brien says these are the elements of a successful meeting. There's 7 of them there, 6 of them rather. Is there something missing? I wouldn't be surprised if you had a group of 4 or 5 people together, they could find something. But let's talk about these, because these are the core. Okay, and we'll start with the preparation and planning. So this is starting with defining what that objective is, what that outcome is. What is it that you want to get out of it? And I think at some level, that whole think, feel, do could apply to you as well in the planning stages, right? What do I want to think? How do I want to feel? What do I want to do after this meeting, right? Determine who needs to attend. The others are pretty obvious, but distribute key information ahead of time. So I've got a meeting this afternoon with a client where we need to make a decision on a survey that we're doing. And so this very early this morning, I wish I had done it yesterday, but I didn't. Just going to be candid, I didn't. But I did it at 6:30 this morning. I sent them the second revision to the survey. And I said, okay, so this is where I'm at with it based on our last meeting. Take a look at it. We'll talk about it. So by sending them that information beforehand, it gives us a jump start in that meeting. We're not wasting time talking about what we did in our last meeting. That 1-page document that I sent them, actually it's 2 pages, is kind of the sum of what our last meeting was, so they have it ahead of time. Develop and distribute the agenda 1 day in advance, I think is reasonable. I sometimes go with 2 or 3 days. I told you that example of the Friday meetings where I try to send it Monday afternoon or very early Tuesday morning. And I guess the reason I do that, that's probably the only one where I do it that far in advance. It's just there's a lot of people involved and there's a lot of complex issues that we're dealing with. So I just want to kind of focus and zero us in. And I also am respectful of the fact that everybody's really busy and I can't expect them to respond to me today. So I'll send it Monday afternoon and say, please let me know if there's any additions or questions by 5 o'clock on Wednesday. That gives them, and by now it's kind of routine, so they know they're going to get that from me and they know they have a couple days to respond. And then anticipate issues that may come up. Like, okay, these people aren't going to be there. I heard that Susan's traveling today, so she's not going to be in that meeting. So how does that affect what Barbara's doing or Bill is doing or Jason's doing? Just kind of anticipating that could be helpful. But let's tap into your wisdom. What are some strategies that you use to feel really well prepared for your meetings? This is the perfect example of tapping into your wisdom. What are some things that you do? Anybody?
Role play. You go over what you're going to present, how you're going to present it.
Yeah.
Time it just to make sure your timelines are all there.
Yeah. That's you, Elizabeth, huh?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
me.
yeah, I like that. Really good. Anybody else? Thank you. Anybody else? Things that you're doing strategies you use to feel really well prepared?
I do like keywords is what I call them, to keep me focused on my thought process. So I just throw out kind of like one keyword about that topic or that piece of the agenda. So then I finish that. And then so instead of writing, like big notes and long paragraphs, the keywords keep me focused.
Yeah, love it, Janine. Thank you. Tuesday, I apologize. Thank you, Tuesday. Yeah, that's a great strategy. It helps you keep focused, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to put up a lot of space. Anybody else? Okay, good. So thanks for that. Let's go into the next thing. This is part of that planning, the agenda planner or meeting planner that I sent to you yesterday. Just want to spend a minute on it. It can be, particularly when you're starting to build into the framework of our session today and applying it, this can be especially effective in that. You can use parts of it, you can use all of it, but what it does really is it helps in kind of like Tuesday's reference point a moment ago, it gives some structure. Those words that you pick give you structure, right? It gives you a framework to follow. This is no different. And you can spend as much time, I don't think that this is a half-hour drill. I think it could be a 5 or 10-minute drill when you're planning your next meeting, the next meeting you have, whether it's tomorrow or next week. I think it would be helpful to just reference it. It gives you some framework, and the whole idea behind the framework is to Tuesday's point is it helps keep us on track. Just something to think about. Okay. So then meeting management. Now I talked a little bit about the ground rules before. I think most teams benefit and value these. They benefit from and value these. And I think a lot of times, from my experience, they're kind of unspoken ground rules, and they work fine. But there are also teams and groups and topics, by the way, that might warrant having formal ground rules, like, one person speaks at a time, like there's no negative comments, like everybody has to make sure that we understand. We all have to take some ownership for clarity of understanding, which means that I ask questions if I'm not clear, right? Those are just a few things to consider. And if you want, if anybody's interested, send me a separate email tomorrow. I'm pretty jammed up tomorrow, but I'll get to it. I'm actually working. I'm going to work on Monday a little bit, even though it's the holiday, just to catch up. So anyway, my point is this. If you're curious about ground rules for teams and meetings, send me an email and I will send you a document or two that I've used with teams on how to create ground rules for your meetings. I'd be happy to do that. Just send me thing. And then the subject line, you could say ground rules. That's all I would need to know. All right. So this is part of the meeting management. The objectives, the background information, status reports are typically part of it. This is at least the weekly one, certainly the monthly or quarterly. And then, getting at problems and solutions, that should be an important part of the meeting, right? Because oftentimes that's a focal point. So what are our challenges? What's getting in the way? What are the solutions? And I think it's fair to say that, and you're the best judge of this or the best person to determine this, what is the allotment for each of those segments? So depending on the complexity of the issue, you may find that you need to spend more of the time on problem solving and solution generation than status reports. I don't know. It's different for every group, but it's something to be considering, that's for sure. And then actions and accountabilities. I said before that not having an agenda is a place where it sets it up for not being effective. And in following like that, not having accountabilities clearly defined is another way of derailing the success of the meeting. And oftentimes what happens, and again, I don't mean to overemphasize the overpacking of the agenda, but when we overpack the agenda, we just don't have time to get to accountabilities at the end. And then people just fly out the door because they're going to another meeting. And we're left feeling like, well, did everybody get an idea of who's doing what? I personally think, and this is how I run meetings, I like to be able to stay at the end. All right, so who's doing what when? Who is doing what when? And I record it, I write it down, and I ask people to write it down. So I had this meeting on Friday, my routine Friday meeting, and at the end I said, okay, so who's doing what and when? All right, you're taking that, good. Okay, so Lori's taking that, she's going to have that done next Friday, or before next Friday. Okay, Scott's going to take this, he's going to get that done by Wednesday. Okay, good. Dave is going to do this, he's going to get that done by Thursday. Now we walk out of there knowing that Dave and Lori and Scott, three of the key people on that team who have accountability on that part of what we're doing, have their deliverables clearly defined and they know when, right? So it's just something to think about. But let me go back to tapping into your wisdom. What techniques do you use or strategies do you use to help keep things on track? The meeting management. What do you do to keep it on track? Anybody?
This
I
is
don't-
where I scored a 2.
Say it
Yeah,
again.
Me too, so yeah, I
I
don't,
scored a 2.
You scored a 2?
Yeah, when we were doing the inventory, this is
Oh,
where
got
I
it,
got
got it,
a 2.
okay.
And yeah, I think my problem is with that is I feel like I want people to be heard, and I feel like, in those types of meetings, that what everyone has to say is important.
Yeah.
And then that's where it kind of gets messy after that.
Yeah, got it. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Reasonable, but you're aware of it, and so now you can modify that a little bit, right? That's the good news. So and that awareness is the good news. Did anybody else have anything to add?
I was just going to say, I'm very close with my team. We've been working together for quite a while. So I've been able to develop the rapport with them to kind of call it out and say, all right, guys, I hear that this particular topic has come up for you. It's not what we're talking about right now, but it is important. So can we get back to the agenda? Let's take time because we have weekly meetings, bi-weekly. Let's take time to discuss this on our Friday meeting. So that way it's still being addressed, because I want to know more and I want to hear what you guys have to say, but I also don't want to run out of time on what we have to get to today. So that way they know that we're going to talk about it, that there's a date that they're going to talk about it. So it's not just being tabled and forgotten about. We can also stick to the actual agenda at hand.
Yeah. I'm giving you the double high five through the camera here, Jordan. That's like perfection. Okay. Did everybody hear that? Because that's perfection. When you get to the recording next week, remember this part, slide 14, because that's something we all have to deal with. And that parking lot issue item or suggestion, there's a correlation to that, but I think this is handling it even better. So hats off to you, my friend. That was excellent. Thank you. So let's go a little bit further, look at the people points. And this is an important part of it. And this can go into the ground rules too, by the way. It starts with that ensuring that there's mutual respect. That's such a big part of it. oftentimes in meetings, we've all been in these meetings where you have a profile of a group we have 2 or 3 high verbals that always are talking, that always have an opinion, that like to be heard. Maybe there's some of that element going on. You have 2 or 3 people that are feeling like overwhelmed by that, so they don't want to say too much, and they're not comfortable with that because other people are like, they're a little bit too intense. And then you have other people that are completely checked out because they're checking their email and their voicemail and their shopping list and all that. And that could be part of the ground rules, by the way. I deal with that a lot in my work, where teams have this rule, or no, it's an unwritten rule, or it's a written rule that says, listen, when we're in this meeting, we don't have our phones going. I remember reading some years ago, the CEO of Aetna, Mark Bertolini at the time, instituted a new policy that when you're in his meeting, you leave your phone on the desk outside his office. You do not bring your phone into the room. If you need to be on the phone, then you don't need to be in the meeting. That was his philosophy. And largely it was done for respecting everybody's time and respecting everybody's input. I think that's pretty powerful, but you decide what works for you. Get everybody involved, keep the meeting on time and on track, eliminate interruptions and distractions, listen more, talk less. I think it's about making people feel that it's a good use of their time. I think it's about making people feel that we're getting something done as an extension of that, and that ultimately we're all respected. What are some strategies that you folks use to keep the people points on track? Anything? Can you think of anything? Any other strategies? Okay, we'll go to the next slide. That's fine. This is important to build clarity and consensus. I said a moment ago that we all have a responsibility for understanding, right? To ensure clarity. These are some ways of drawing that out. These are some ways of creating that you can use as the meeting facilitator. You can read them. They're all good, I think, and they all have application to different people and to different settings. I'm not saying you should use all of these in one meeting. You could, depending on the size of the meeting and the people and the topics. But I think these are really helpful to get people to feel understood and to make sure that there's clarity in the room. That's a really big part of it, right? So let's look at dealing with difficult dynamics. This is something that happens in a lot of meetings these days. So, okay, negative attitudes. Don't ramble. That makes no sense. That's impossible. Stop repeating yourself. Hurry up. We're almost out of time. Where did that idea come from? Just the tone or inflection says the whole story, right? Or that's ridiculous. Versus the supportive attitudes. And here's something that's worth noting. You as each of you as leaders and influencers have tremendous capacity to manage this effectively. So look at the difference. So supportive attitudes, take your time. Tell me more about that. That's an interesting idea. Go ahead. I'm all ears. Is this what you're trying to say? Could you please repeat that? That's a great idea, right? And this is a short list of both of those. However, they do happen. And those negative attitudes drain the energy out of the room. They drain any capacity to be creative problem solvers. And it just makes everybody feel crummy. Now, I'd like to think that in February of 2023, we've got all of those negative attitudes behind us. But from what I'm seeing in my work, I'm inclined to say not so much. Maybe better than 2 years ago or a year ago, but I think they still exist. So with that in mind, we're going to do my favorite activity in this program. By the way, I should tell you that this is a 90-minute version of a 3-hour program. In the 3-hour program, there's a case study from Patrick Lenciini's book, Death by Meetings. There's several other activities, but in either way, this is in that program and it's in here today. And because of that, it's my favorite activity. So here's what we're going to do. Lisa's going to split you into 2 groups. I don't know what we have for a number, Lisa. Is probably 4 or 5 in each group. I'll leave it up to you, but she'll show you, she'll direct you to your group. We're going to have group team A and team B. And team A, they're going to focus on supportive attitudes. We're going to give you a couple minutes to get organized. You're going to need to have a scribe somebody that writes down the answers, and a spokesperson, somebody that shares them with us when we get done the activity. But here's what it is. How many uses of a hat can you identify in 7 minutes? Now, you're going to be focusing on that. You're both going to be focusing on how many uses of a hat. But in team A, you're going to be using supportive attitudes like the ones that I just showed you. Now, in team B, you're also going to try to define the same uses or a number of uses for a hat, but I want everybody else to be playing, or everybody's got to be playing the negative attitudes. Like, oh, that'll never work. That's ridiculous. You decide. You use whatever framework you want. But here's the point. In that 7 minutes, both groups are going to try to define the total number of uses for a hat using either the supportive attitudes or the negative attitudes. You're going to record that. Somebody's going to record that. And then we're going to debrief it to discover what did we learn from it. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Gallo right now. Lisa, I'm going to ask you to put these folks in the room. I'm going to put up this slide in the room once you get in. And then we'll debrief it in 7 minutes. Okay.
All right. So as you're moving in, you can see what room you're in. But since we have an intimate group, I'm just going to tell you, Team A is Diana, Janine, and Sarah. Team B is Elizabeth, Jordan, and Tuesday. All right. So you got 7 minutes. Don't forget to get your recorder situated, and we'll see you back here in 7.
All right. Thanks, Lisa. All right. Now I'm going to do another share.
Yep.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Glad you could welcome.
Getting us on time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming back. Elizabeth's laughing. That's good. Okay. So, okay, Elizabeth, do you happen to be the spokesperson for your group?
I didn't take the Tuesday. I think Tuesday was writing it, but I can.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I wrote the notes.
Okay.
all right, so Tuesday, go ahead. How many uses of a hat did you come up with in your group?
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We came up with 7.
7. Okay. All right. So Janine, how many did you come up with in your group?
13.
Okay.
Wow.
One
All
up.
right.
You're one up.
So what was the experience like? Either one of you, Tuesday or Janine, what was that experience like?
We found it difficult to be negative.
Oh, you found it difficult to be negative. Okay. All right. So what can we learn from the activity? So this, supportive attitudes came up with 13, negative attitudes came up with 7. So what can we learn from that experience?
Positive is easier.
Yeah. And
You
you
get
get
more work done, more
you get more-
ideas.
well, that's exactly it. And that's the whole story behind it. That when we're using supportive attitudes, we're getting more input. And more input often means better solutions. So you are welcome to do that activity with your team. But thank you all for your responsiveness to it. I really appreciate it. So let's go into problem solving and decision making. These are some more things that you can be doing in the meeting itself. You know, restate the objectives, define the rules for constructive discontent. I think that could be a good tie-in with the positive and negative or supportive attitudes. Define the formula for achieving closure. What does closure look like? And then measure, how do you measure it? I think that becomes part of it too. That becomes a big part of it. And then accountability, the last part of it is looking at defining the pending issues, approximate milestones and end dates. I think that all becomes very clear. Action plan with assignments, distribute meeting notes. So I've had meetings where we've had a note keeper, and that could be another person that also could be the timekeeper. But I've had meetings where we've had a note keeper that then distributes those meeting notes out to everybody. That's really pretty cool. That really is very helpful. It's a little bit cumbersome, but I've also seen it by where in certain teams, one person rotates that role every meeting. So it's not the same person doing it, but I think it's something to consider. What are some other strategies that you use for ensuring accountability? Anybody?
I use a calendar.
A calendar, that's good.
I distribute calendars out to my team.
Yeah. Okay. Calendar. Anybody else?
I just review back who's responsible for what, so everybody is clear and on the same page.
I think that's very important, right? And then some of it is delegating too, right? And I thought I'd add this. as just a frame of reference, delegating can be helpful in the following situations, because sometimes what happens as we're running the meeting, we've got to delegate tasks, right? So these are some things to consider, but I've got some more to consider on the next slide, and that can be very helpful. Hello, I'm sorry, I'm having a problem with my flipper here. But deciding who to select for the task, you should consider the outcome, the related timeline, the current workload of the employee, the training and experience level, and their history of meeting or exceeding your expectations. I think that becomes part of it too. And then let me just see if I can go to this. The follow through. Yeah, okay, there we go. The follow through is an important part of it. And that's, obviously making sure that people are held accountable, reinforcing that with action, having clear and reasonable metrics that I think clear that everybody understands, but also agrees to. But what are some other things you're doing to ensure success with your follow through? Anybody?
Just let them know that I'm available if they have any questions.
Yeah.
Or they need to talk about anything, and giving a deadline to some items.
I do shout outs when it is done.
Yeah.
Like, hey, great work. I acknowledge the fact of what went into it.
Yeah. Smart. Yeah. And now, do you do that publicly Tuesday?
It depends. Because of some of the sensitivity of, information, I will do it with my internal team, but then when it is something that affects, the company wide, I'm doing those, like emails out to all users kind of thing.
Got it. Yeah. And I think that, how about you, Janine? What are you doing with that?
Well, I do, like I said, I do let people know that I'm available if they have any questions or if they need any help. I'll do shout outs as well, usually just through Teams to whatever group I'm working with.
Yeah.
And I do depending on whatever the task is, I do like to give some sort of timeline or deadline.
Got it.
So that people stay on track.
Yeah. And I think that you're the best judge. Each of you are the best person to decide how it's delivered, right? But I see that so much, the value that acknowledging their efforts, right? Those shout outs, those things like that. It reminds me that oftentimes, and I'm sure I think all of you would agree, so often it's those little things that go a long way, right? Those little things, those little, nice job, or hey, shout out to Mary or Bob or Sue or whoever, great job on getting that work done. That was good feedback we had, whatever it may be. But I think it goes a really long way to help people feel valued, appreciated, and ultimately respected, right? Good. Anything else? Any other strategies? Let me just, I'm going to stop here for a second before we go to the next slide. And I want to just throw out this question. And this could be from your vantage point as your meeting, or a vantage point of someone else's meeting that you attend. And so it could be either of those scenarios. So I want to make it neutral as much as possible. What do you think continues to get in the way of successful meetings in your area or in your organization or in business today or in any sector today? What do you think is one of the things that continues to get people stuck? Anybody?
Discontent.
Tell me more.
I feel that some of the groups of people that I have to have meetings with, they just are constantly like, well, this isn't good enough. And why aren't you doing this for us? And why isn't this being done? And there's a lot of that negative, talk that's going on. And they can't seem to get out of that cycle. And though we're trying to help them to rise above that and see the positives, it's just very, very difficult to remove that kind of discontent film that they have.
Yeah. Does anybody else, thanks Tuesday, does anybody else experience that? So, okay, let's tackle Tuesday's issue for a second, or challenge. How do you overcome that? How do we overcome that? So we've got these group of people that are in that meeting that are just generally not happy, right? They're kind of bringing down the energy of the room. They're negative, the whiners and complainers, the victims and critics in my model, my behavior model that some of you are familiar with. What do you do? How do you manage that? Come on, we've got a lot of wisdom on this webinar. Anybody? Let's help.
So,
Help Tuesday.
So if I have those type of people, which usually you always have some, I'm like, okay, you know, for every negative, I'm gonna ask you to give me something positive, and we'll talk about both, kind of try to steer them into the positive realm normally.
Okay, good. Yeah. Because there's always a flip side, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I've learned over the years, sometimes maybe the hard way, is that wherever they are is where they are, right? And you know, I'm generally a pretty upbeat guy. I have my moments where I'm not, but you know, I think what happens is it's about trying to meet them where they are. And it's about being mindful of the fact that because we're leaders and influencers, we have to be very mindful about not judging so much. And it's easy to do. Believe me, I've been in those meetings where it's like, stop your noise, you know, but here's what happens. That just kind of creates more of a disconnect. So I think at some level, it's about trying to find that balance between, hey, okay, I'm hearing you, but you know, to Elizabeth's point, maybe what's the other side of that? Or what is working? Let's just take a moment right now. I've got somebody in my life who, whenever I talk to her, she's always complaining things are bad. And so I'll often say, well, hey, what's working for you today? You know, what's going good today? And that kind of shifts the dynamic, and it shifts the conversation, kind of along the lines of what you said, Elizabeth. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, well, I think sometimes people bring their negativity because their voice isn't being heard somehow.
Yeah.
So that's their way of expressing their frustration. So somehow, whether it's on the group or independently, you have to address and say, you know, let them know that their voice is heard and it's safe for them to express. Whatever their, you know, frustration is.
Yeah. And I think it's also good to remember that in most cases, that person who's vocalizing that discontent is not a happy person, right? And it may be something that's carried over from home or outside of work. And so, you know, trying to be mindful of that, not necessarily supporting it or encouraging it, but, you know, being mindful and respectful of where they are, and then trying to kind of bring them over to the other side a little bit. It takes time, that's for sure. But Tuesday, is any of that helpful?
Yes, that is. I like the, you know, for every negative, let's give a positive, and the what is working, you know, because there's always something working, right? And there's always some type of positive, and we just need to, instead of the negative glasses, we need to put on the positive.
Yeah. And along those lines, you just inspired me to think of this. I've used this too. I've used it for myself. Hey, what's one thing you're thankful for today? Right? What's 1 ounce of gratitude you have? What's something you're thankful for today? Because that can shift it too, right? And God forbid, you know, I mean, listen, it's real. I think it's pretty fair to say that all of us could be thinking about that a little more often, even on our good days. I think gratitude is such an important part of it, particularly of how we show up. And more than likely, even the most negative of people have to have something that they're thankful for, right? Hey, they got out of bed this morning. They have a job, you know, that's pretty cool. So anyway, I just throw that out. So let's go into brainstorming a little bit about where we've been. We've covered a lot of ground in an hour and 20 minutes. We've got a few minutes left. I got a couple more things I want to do, but what stood out for you? What's the most important lesson, reminder, or discovery that you've had in our time together? Anybody?
Just to continue to be mindful of not only the business goals, like through your agenda, but people's time.
Yeah, good. Okay. Thanks, Janine. What else? Anybody else?
I work on my agenda.
Work on your agenda. Thanks.
Me too. The 24 hours was a big key takeaway for me. Just kind of some awareness on how to set up my presentation to stay in line with timelines and my audience.
Yeah. And I got to be the first one to tell you, I know it's hard some days. It's really hard to get all that done, right? We have good intentions. Listen, all of us care about being a good leader. That's why you've taken the time out to be part of this. That's why I'm doing it. That's a given, right? But we get busy, we get distracted. And so I think the opportunity is to be mindful of that and say, okay, maybe I could start doing this better tomorrow or next week, or, let's just say for conversation purposes, if I have 3 meetings next week that I'm leading, I'm going to do my absolute best to get an agenda for 1 or 2 of them. Would I in a day in advance, or maybe at the latest, I'm going to get it an hour before. But what I'm doing there is I'm building in a little bit of wiggle room so that I'm being kind to myself too, right? Because like I said before, it's about small steps. So anyway, good. So I think those are some of the examples of what you could apply. What value would doing that create? Any one of those, what value would that create for you and the team?
Well, I think that it would help, like if I tighten up my agenda too, I think it helps to know that I'll get those tasks done efficiently and not, partially do it just to check the box.
Yeah.
And make sure it's done right. Because in the end, that's what's going to benefit employees. That's what it's going to benefit the business.
Yeah, amen, right? That's a good one. Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Anybody else in terms of what value it creates?
I think it creates the value too when you're considering other people's times. You're being, they're aware that their time is important. They have other things to do too. So the strict agenda is going to be important for those pieces.
It's a great reminder. Thanks, Elizabeth. Yeah, that it's saying that you take their time seriously, right? And I think that's important. That's an extension of respect, right? So good job, everybody. Let me go to this next slide. I want to share with you a couple of resources. Hello there. I want to share with you a couple of resources. On my website, workchoicesolutions.com, on the navigator bar, some of you have seen this or familiar with it, others perhaps not, so that's why I'm sharing it. On the navigator bar, there's a thing called Learning Resources. If you click on that, there's a drop-down menu. In that drop-down menu, you have a whole bunch of my articles. There's also a whole bunch of assessments, leadership assessments. There's a case study there too. These are some of my most recent articles. You are welcome to download and share any of that content, including the assessments, if it's going to help you in your role as a leader. So I want to just go ahead and make that offer to you. It's all there and there's no charge, and I don't track who's on the website. So Jessica Jackley, co-founder of Kiva. Kiva is a micro loan organization that was created to support third world countries getting out of poverty. So they loan small, they offer small loans to developing countries, to help people get out of poverty. So it's a really special organization, but I like her. I followed her for a while. She's a great thinker and leader. Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. And I think back, all of a sudden, the light bulb just went off, how much that's linked to Marshall Goldsmith's post that I saw yesterday, right? I hadn't made that connection until right now. What do you think it's saying to us? What's the story behind it? Anybody? What is it telling you, Elizabeth?
Oh, geez. I guess it's telling me that both are important. Whatever decision you make is going to be important or affect somebody else, either ourselves or those in the workplace.
Yeah, good. Tuesday, what do you think?
I think that it's telling me, what I'm reading at it is it's impactful what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. Both have an impact on the people that I work with and work for.
Yeah, terrific. I love it. Yeah, there's no wrong answer to either of those. I think they're terrific, by the way. Thank you. And this could be another good conversation starter. Look what we just got out of it in like a minute, 35 seconds, really, a minute at the most. Those two perspectives that are linked, but then they're different at the same time. but they're both right. And that's powerful. And, you know, I use quotes just as a sidebar. I use quotes a lot in my work because they get us to think. And that could be one of the conversation starters. You know, you could say to somebody back at work, hey, you know, Dave had this quote in there. I'd like to just have us mull it over a little bit. What does it think to you? What does it mean to you? Right? Because it's both of what you said. It's exactly what you said. So anyway, I'm going to go to this last slide here. What am I doing? I'm going backwards. Oh my God, there it is. So I'm sorry I had some technical difficulties. I prayed last night that I wouldn't have any technical difficulties. I guess my prayers didn't get answered, but we're doing okay. None of you, I don't think any of you were on that November 9th webinar where I lost internet about 12 minutes into the webinar. So that was a real bummer, but Lisa, we survived at least. Anyway, I would appreciate your input. This is a link to the survey. You're also going to be getting a follow-up email from me probably in the next hour with this link. So if you can do it now, that's great. If you do it later, that's fine. Would love your feedback. And then as a further courtesy and appreciation for you being part of this, I'm sending to you in that email in about an hour a PDF of my first book, The Navigator's Handbook, 101 Leadership Lessons for Work and Life. And you are welcome to share that with anyone. I think Tuesday you probably have read it or seen it. I know Tracy buys like 24 a year from me,
Yes.
and she has me sign them. So you've probably already read it. I don't know if the others have, but anyway, it's there. I'm sending it to you with the follow-up link for the survey on this webinar. You'll see that in about an hour. I'm also going to be downloading the recording and getting it to you next Tuesday. So please watch for that, okay? And I want to thank Lisa Gallo for being the best webinar producer in the business, coming to us live from Seattle, Washington. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. I never tire of that. I hope you don't tire of it.
No.
You're the best. You're the best. All right. So, hey, listen, thanks, everybody. We finished up a few minutes early. You now have 5 minutes to spare in your day. Do something for yourself. Okay.